Hello and welcome to Movie Recap. Today I am going to recap drama thriller film Welcome Home. Brian and Cassie are a young American couple who arrive in the Italian countryside for a holiday. Their relationship has been going through a rough patch ever since Brian discovered she cheated on him with another man. So now, they intend to fix the damage caused by her infidelity by spending a romantic vacation in Italy. Soon after, the couple arrives at a lovely mansion that they've rented. Inside the house, they discover a bottle of wine and a greeting letter on the table. Eduardo, the house owner, is out of town but urges them to call him if there's any problem. The couple is taken aback by how well organized the house is and how beautiful the surroundings are. That evening, the couple sits around a campfire, drinking wine and having a lovely time. Moments later, when Brian gets upstairs, he discovers a man named Justin calling on Cassie's phone. He becomes enraged seeing this because this is the same guy Cassie slept with. He does, however, make his way down to the pool and tries to accompany Cassie. The two start kissing, but Brian finds it difficult to be intimate since he's still hurt by her infidelity. After that, they both go to sleep. Around midnight, Brian hears an odd noise from a distance. He then goes to check and finds that the record player is spinning. Brian begins looking around the house and discovers some erotic books. As he checks them out, he thinks of Cassie and pleasures himself. Meanwhile, we see that the house is being spied on from a room full of monitors by a mysterious person. The following morning, Cassie gets up early and goes for a run in the woods. She then begins to recall events from her argument with Brian after she was discovered cheating. Cassie feels horrible with the thought, and in a distracted moment, she falls on the ground and sprains her ankle. She then tries to walk back to the house, but it's too difficult for her. Soon after, Cassie notices a passing truck and stops it to plead for help. Now, a man gets out of the truck and examines her injuries. As he tends to Cassie's sprained ankle, we learn that his name is Federico and he's Eduardo's neighbor. He politely offers to drive her back to the house in his truck. To thank him for his help, Cassie invites Federico in for a cup of coffee. Brian is not pleased to see him since he believes the man is attracted to Cassie. During the conversation, Federico offers to drive them to the city since cabs don't generally reach their location. Brian refuses because he doesn't trust his intentions. Immediately, Cassie scolds Brian for being rude to the man who has just helped her. Afterward, Cassie comes out from the shower when Brian approaches and kisses her. The two try to make love again, but Brian keeps seeing Cassie and Justin, so he eventually stops. On the other hand, we discover that the person watching the house from the cameras is none other than Federico himself. The following day, Federico takes the couple to the city as Brian finally accepts his help. Once in the city, Brian and Cassie argue because he's jealous of Federico. He thinks Federico wants to sleep with her, which is why he's helping them. Cassie, on the other hand, knows that the real cause of his jealousy is what happened with Justin. So she apologizes to Brian, clarifying that she was drunk and it only lasted 2 minutes. She truly regrets it every day. However, Brian finds it difficult to let go, and they both end up separating. Later, Cassie gets frustrated as she struggles to get money from the ATM. Just then, Federico appears out of nowhere and offers to help her. Cassie's grateful for his help and gets inside the cab to head home. Meanwhile, Brian tries to calm his mind by drinking at a nearby bar. Federico then comes in and strikes up a conversation with him. As Brian begins to get drunk, he opens up a great deal about Cassie's infidelity and the troubles they're facing. He even admits to Federico that he occasionally feels tempted to cheat on her just to get even. Moments later, Federico invites 2 local ladies to the table and asks them to flirt with Brian. Cassie, on the other hand, becomes concerned and calls Brian as he hasn't returned home, but little does she know that her man is too drunk to answer her calls. Later on, we see Federico sneaking into the house and approaching Cassie, who's sleeping. He then strokes her hair and caresses her briefly before leaving. The following morning, Brian awakens in a motel with no recollection of what happened the night before. He recalls arriving at the motel with 2 girls and realizes that he's lost his phone. When Brian finally arrives home, Cass is furious because she hasn't been able to contact him all night. Seeing her point, he apologizes to Cassie and claims to have misplaced his phone. Afterward, Brian goes to Federico's home to talk about what happened last night. When he arrives, he calls out for Federico, but no one responds. At this point, Brian feels something peculiar and opens the door only to discover that the house is absolutely deserted. Meanwhile, Federico arrives at the house with a dead rabbit and offers to cook dinner. Cassie appears to be won over by his sweet gestures and allows them wholeheartedly. Soon, Brian arrives home agitated and pretends that everything's okay in front of Cassie. Later, Brian takes Federico away from Cassie and informs him that he discovered that Federico doesn't live in the neighboring house as he claimed. However, Federico threatens to tell Cassie that Brian slept with 2 girls from the bar last night. Despite his disbelief that he committed such a thing, Brian becomes worried and decides to stay quiet. Later, the 3 of them sit down for supper together, and it gets really awkward. Federico begins to taunt Brian with sarcasm about how well he spoke about Cassie the night before. But Cassie is also beginning to suspect that Federico is not as good as he appears. After dinner, Brian approaches Federico and threatens to call the cops if he returns, although Federico doesn't seem to be scared about it. After Federico leaves, Cassie admits to Brian that he was right about Federico and claims that she feels strange vibes from that man. As they talk, Brian reveals that he went to Federico's alleged home this afternoon, but it was obviously vacant and uninhabited. Brian says he'll call the police if he returns, but first, he calls Eduardo and leaves a voicemail saying a man has been pestering them. While all this is happening, we see Federico listening and watching the conversation through the cameras. Next, Brian promptly secures the house and tells Cassie what happened the night before. He claims that the girls only took him to the motel and that he did not sleep with them. Cassie is initially upset, but she eventually believes him, and the two reconcile. With this, the couple decides to have an intimate night in their room, and Brian goes to the wine cellar, while Cassie gets ready. On the other hand, Federico notices this and is outraged that the couple has reconciled. When Brian goes to the wine cellar, he becomes trapped and is unable to get out. Meanwhile, Cassie discovers a letter on the bed ordering her to take her clothes off and put on a blindfold. She believes the note is from Brian, so she becomes excited and does as she's told. Suddenly, Federico enters the room and begins to caress her, and Cassie believes this is her boyfriend. Brian, on the other hand, is getting frustrated and trying everything he can to escape from the cellar. Moments later, he sees a door behind the cellar that leads to another room. Federico realizes that Brian has managed to escape, so he quickly runs away from the room. Seconds later, Brian enters a room where he discovers a recording of Cassie with Federico that was taken minutes earlier while she was blindfolded. Brian is enraged by this, as he assumes that Cassie has cheated on him once again. Meanwhile, Cassie removes her blindfold and gets confused since she can't see Brian in the room. Surprisingly, she discovers his lost phone on the bed, where she notices a video recording of Brian with the girls from the bar last night. Brian is clearly unconscious, and the girl is doing all sorts of things with him. Cassie is furious that Brian lied to her and thinks that it's his way of taking revenge. Soon after that, the couple find each other, and they argue about the videos they just saw. In a fit of anger, Cassie throws Brian's phone at the mirror, and they suddenly see a hidden camera on the wall. The couple is horrified to realize that all their activities have been monitored by someone. They also clarify the video they just saw and believe Federico is behind it. At this point, Brian and Cassie assume that the house owner is Federico and that there's no Eduardo, as they've never met him or seen him. Meanwhile, Federico understands his cover has been blown and gets worried, so as a last resort, he walks out of the room with a knife in his hand. Brian tries to call the police in desperation, but their line is suddenly disconnected. Soon after that, Federico approaches the couple in an intimidating way. He tells them that he generally just watches, but he met Cassie on the road and fell in love with her. Brian tries to defuse the situation by telling him that they'll not reveal anything and just leave. But Federico has no intention of letting them go. With this, Brian and Federico get into a fight, and while Brian disarms his enemy, Federico manages to pin Brian down on the ground. While they're fighting, Cassie comes from the back and bashes Federico down with a walking stick. She then vents her rage on him and kills him by repeatedly striking his head with the stick. Brian drags Federico's body and hides it. They're both really nervous about opening the door, but the visitor turns out to be the owner of the house, Eduardo. Eduardo claims he showed up because he heard Brian's voicemail about someone pestering them. Brian tries to fend off Eduardo by telling him that everything's okay now, but Eduardo insists on checking the house to ensure that everything's in order. The couple has no choice but to comply. After that, Cassie and Brian begin to discuss the possibility of being charged with murder if Eduardo discovers what happened. At the same time, Eduardo inches towards the control room, and we learn that he and Federico are accomplices. He learns through the video footage that Federico has been killed. He then covers the camera in the living room and walks up to Cassie, insisting that she tell the truth as he pesters her. Brian appears behind him, ready to attack. However, Eduardo instantly turns toward him and pulls out his gun. Next, Eduardo tries to get the couple to confess to the crime, but Cassie stabs him in the back. Seeing an opening, Brian beats him with his cane, takes his gun, and shoots him dead. After that, Brian discovers the secret basement where the surveillance is installed. To his surprise, Federico and Eduardo have recorded everyone who's ever visited the house. He then immediately unplugs all the cameras from the house and burns them. Together, the couple buries the bodies in the backyard, and they promise to keep the events secret between the two of them. The tragedy seems to have helped to heal their relationship as Brian eventually makes love to Cassie without visualizing any past events. In the final scene, we see a video of Brian and Cassie burying the bodies in the backyard. It turns out that they were unable to find a camera that had been put in the garden. This camera records everything that happened in the garden and sends a live video to a website called ICU. People who watch this video are shocked, but they soon become unconcerned and switch to other channels. It turns out that this website records footage of couples from all around the world visiting vacation homes, and Eduardo was just one of the owners that took part in the shady network to make quick money. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.